You can make the best decision ever, and if you don't communicate it well, you've lost it. I mean, you've lost the battle, even if it's the exact right decision. And then you kind of start your next season or with your next pastor, you kind of start below ground with the trust.
Yeah.
Because you kind of lost it in bungling the communication.
Welcome back to the LeadingSmart Podcast, where this season we are talking all about pastoral succession. And on today's episode, episode 7, we are discussing communicating the transition. Tim, this is where a lot of churches get stuck. They do so much work, sometimes years, months, definitely weeks, working up to this moment. And then it crashes and burns because they haven't figured out a communication plan. So talk to us first. How do you know when it's time to announce the transition to the congregation or the community?
So that's super unique to each church and each situation. Some churches I have seen will announce, in fact, I'm working with a church right now, that 2 years prior to the senior pastor's last day, they told the church about the process. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they'll tell them about the process, like, hey, we're starting a process. Pastor stands up and says, I'm not going to be here forever. I'm planning to transition in the next 3 to 5 years. We just want you to know, pray with us about this, stand with us, support us. There's some pros and cons. The benefit of that is it allows you to engage a conversation with the church, because people tend to accept what they own. And if they have some ownership, the ownership may be, man, we're going to pray for the next 2 years on this. Mm-hmm. The ownership may be like you pull them into some, this is fun to do, like pull them into some, user forums, some town hall kinds of settings, and just say, okay, let's dream about the future of the church. Let's dream about the type of pastor that you would want to be leading here next or serving here next. And it allows you to pull a lot of more people into the process. A con is it introduces some instability.
Yeah.
It's really hard for the senior pastor who's already said he's leaving to say, hey, here's what we're doing for the next 5 years, because people are like, I don't think you're going to be here. Mm-hmm. So it can introduce some instability into the life of the church. I think at some point, like we talked a few episodes ago about the cone of silence, and a lot of churches will choose that route. They'll be like, this is going to be a board-only conversation with maybe a few exceptions until we get pretty far down the road. And in some cases, until they pick the successor. The church I mentioned that's about 2 years away, when they did stand up and say, I'm 2 years away, he also in the same meeting introduced the next pastor who was already on their staff.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What are the pros and cons of going public versus having the cone of silence? Because you've seen it both ways.
Yeah.
You've probably seen it work both ways and not work both ways.
I think if you want to get a lot of ownership and or you need a lot of church's input on it, mm-hmm. then going public sooner is totally fine. And again, that allows you to engage a lot of people into the conversation. I think the cone of silence route is, and we just went through this this year at Willow Creek, where no one knew, the board and the senior pastor knew that he was going to be transitioning out, and the senior pastor knew that the board was going through a process of mm-hmm. picking the next leader, and then that all happened, and it was announced in one day. This current senior pastor said, I'm leaving. The board stood up and said, man, we're so thankful for him, and here's what we've done to go through a process. And then the new senior pastor stood up and said, here's my vision for the future. That was a 30-minute announcement, all in one swoop. And what it did was it allowed the church just to continue without a beat, without missing a beat. So they there wasn't a season of, oh my word, our pastor's leaving. Mm-hmm. There wasn't time for people to make up stories.
Yep.
Because in the absence of information, people do make up stories and then they begin to believe them. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of benefits to that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so now that we talked about when to communicate the transition, we talked about a little bit about how, which is cone of silence versus, going public throughout the process. And then now let's talk about the different audiences that we need to consider when we're talking about our communication plan. So there's 4 primary audiences: the board, mm-hmm. the staff, the congregation, and then the external, like the broader community.
Yeah.
So let's walk through each of those. Let's start with the board. We've been talking a lot about the board this season because they are an integral part of the succession, the succession process. Are you meaning here it's the senior pastor communicating to the board, or the board deciding what they're going to say? What does that mean?
You have to figure all that out, but specifically with those 4 stakeholder groups, and specifically in that sequence is typically the way that communication goes. So I may just talk about all 4 of them at the same time here.
Yeah.
Regardless of when you're telling your church, whether you're telling them, hey, over the next 3 years, we're going through a transition process, or you're standing up and saying, I'm leaving and here's your new senior pastor. Whichever way you're going, you want to like kind of cascade your conversation with those groups. So let's say the congregation announcement's going to be on a Sunday, then just back it up. So maybe you're meeting with some key stakeholder groups on Friday night. Bring them in for a dinner or whatever. You want them to know first. Maybe you're telling your whole staff Tuesday afternoon before that. Your board obviously has known the whole time, so they're involved in that process. And probably somewhere between the board and the whole staff, you have some key staff, key leaders that have been involved in the process as well. And then again, if Sunday's congregation, then Monday would start your kind of external communication plan with people in the community, people that other churches, networks, denominations, whoever you feel like really needs to know this.
But it sounds like making sure that it's pretty tight.
Very tight.
This is not weeks apart. This is typically days, if not at the same weekend. Information
leaks, and it doesn't mean that your church is full of gossips. It's just information leaks because you're telling everyone in whatever meeting it is, please, don't tell anyone. This is confidential. But they're all telling one person. They're all going home and telling their spouse, or they're calling someone and say, hey, not supposed to tell you this.
Yeah.
But please pray for us.
Don't tell anyone. Yeah, please pray for us. That's always my favorite.
It has a life of its own pretty fast. So I would have those conversations pretty close together.
Yeah. Well, communication is so key in establishing trust, because you said this just a minute ago, but when we don't tell the story, negativity fills the void. And so in the absence of that, we're going to make up our own stories. And going back, we mentioned this on, I don't know if it was our very first or second episode, where you're talking about the 5 dysfunctions of a team with Patrick Lencioni. It's trust is first, then conflict, then communication.
Yeah.
And of a team. And so really making sure that we build trust by having a clear communication plan. So what, over the last 30 some odd years that you've been consulting with churches, what are some of the mistakes that you've seen from a communication perspective that has eroded trust, and what can we learn from those?
I think just not communicating, and then it does pick up a life of its own, and not communicating clearly. So it could be, people just find out that pastor's leaving, and then they begin to wonder, did he do something wrong? Did he get fired? Did the board make him leave? Was this his choice? And that stuff just picks up. And then when you're communicating on the backside of this, it feels like you're just covering something up, or you're just making something up. And people they've already lost trust. And so you've kind of lost the room. So I think that's a way that you can mess this up. You said at the beginning of this episode, at least what I heard you say was you can make the best decision ever. And if you don't communicate it well, you've lost it. I mean, you've lost the battle, even if it's the exact right decision. And then you kind of start your next season, or with your next pastor, you kind of start below ground with the trust.
Yeah.
Because you kind of lost it in bungling the communication.
And that's actually, you're reminding me of something where, and you kind of mentioned this with the Willow situation recently, but how do you make sure that succession is framed as a win and not a loss? Because especially if you're announcing it throughout the process and bringing the church along on the journey, having them have ownership in the process, it could feel like a grieving process, or like a loss versus a win. So what would you tell us to make sure that we're intentional about framing it that way?
Yeah, I would say the grieving, especially if it's a long time or founding pastor, the grieving is going to happen, and you should have room for that. Let people be sad for a minute, because the pastor that married me and buried my mom is not going to be my pastor anymore, and they need a chance to pivot to that. But I do think ultimately, casting it in future terms of vision terms. So this isn't just a change is happening, or we're replacing person A for person B. This is for the thriving of our church, for we're thinking about the next 20, next 25 years of our church life together. And aren't we excited we have, a new leader that's going to lead us forward? And sometimes doing that around key moments. At a church we've worked with recently is coming up on their 50th anniversary. And so they're kind of tying the new pastor into the 50th anniversary. It's a very key time to look back. It's also a key time to look ahead, and tying that into looking forward in the future of the church. I've seen some churches do this with capital campaigns, like at the time the pastor needs to or is choosing to retire, they also need to launch another campus, or they need to build a building, and they need to expand the kids' space. And sometimes they think, we can't do those at the same time. It's like, you absolutely can, because what that does is it points everyone's eyes towards the future, and like something's happening, like we're still growing, something's exciting, something's happening, instead of just thinking about, we're losing our pastor, we're so sad.
Yeah. Giving them something to, again, back to that ownership piece, like take ownership of building for the future.
Yeah.
That's so good. All right. Well, I want to transition into our segment of Rant versus Rave. This is going to be fun. Today, I want us to focus on brands that we want to rave about.
Okay.
And I know you have a whole host. You've got like a long list of your favorite brands.
Well, let's just do one at a time, though.
Oh, one brand at a time?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll just see when we run out.
Can I throw one to you
Please.
first? Your sunglasses.
Yeah.
Shady Rays. Tell us about them.
Shady Rays. Again, none of these brands are paying us any money. You can if you want to.
Yeah.
But as of now,
Tim will take a lifetime subscription to Shady Rays forever.
Rays. So I lose sunglasses. I sit on them. I break them. They're in my backpack and they get cracked or whatever. So Shady Rays has cool glasses. I think they're cool, right?
Yeah, they are cool.
They got lots of different styles, and they replace them for free. If you lose them, crack them, step on them, whatever, they replace them twice for free. You just pay shipping, which is like $11. So you might pay, and I don't pay $300 or $400 for sunglasses like some people do, but I'll pay 30 or 40 or 50 for sunglasses, and then if I lose them, whatever, I get replaced twice for $11.
And you thought of this, which was such a cool idea. I don't think I've ever seen you so excited in our decade that we've known each other. More than when you announced we have these executive pastor gatherings that we do. And I can now talk about this because we're not going to do it again.
Yeah.
But everybody who experienced our executive pastor gatherings in 2025 got a pair of Shady Rays. And so it was at the end of the event, we had a table and they got to try them on and pick
their own
theirs.
style.
It was really cool.
Yeah,
So
it's fun.
Okay, another one that you love, which actually we both love this brand.
So we're not going back and forth. This is all me.
Well, I'm going to participate with you in this. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Viore.
Yes.
Yeah. What piece of clothing from Viore do you love?
Soft pants.
The soft pants?
They're called Pronto or Ponto. I think Pronto.
Okay.
I think are their pants. I wear them all the time if I'm not, like I'm wearing jeans today, but typically if I'm at home, I'm putting these on. They are so comfortable. They're like pajamas, but they don't look like pajamas. So you can go to Walmart in them and not look like one of those people
that goes to Walmart.
with their PJs.
That was so judgmental.
That was a little judgy. So yeah.
I love Viore as well. I have two things from Viore that I love. I don't know what they're called, but they're probably the female version of what you're talking about.
Okay.
Like joggers that are super comfy, that like athleisure that you can wear out, you know, not like leggings, but more, super soft, so comfy. And then the other ones are like more swishy pants. I don't know, you know, and
athletic pants more than athleisure.
No, I mean, they're still athleisure, but they're like they're not like that soft cotton material. I don't know what material they are, but anyway, I love those as well.
All right. So. What's one of your favorite brands?
Well, my go-to like clothing brand is Loft.
Okay.
That's like where I go and I'm like, it's not crazy expensive, but gonna look a little put together. My blazer, if you're watching this on YouTube, is Loft.
Nice.
And then makeup, shout out to, all the ladies listening to this, probably the 5 of you that are. Ilia is my favorite makeup brand.
Ilia.
I think it's Ilia, Ilia.
Oh.
But it's like clean ingredients.
Isn't there a coffee called Ilia or something? Or Ilia?
Oh, you're right. Yeah, I think it is.
Something like that.
But that's my favorite makeup. Yeah, I'm trying to think about it. We have our 2 cars, our Kia cars.
Mm-hmm.
We've been enjoying
Used to be a
those.
Prius family.
We did used to be a Prius family. Then we upgraded to the SUVs, preparing for
gas guzzling SUVs.
child. Yeah. Well, one's a hybrid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which, let's just tell that story for a second. We were talking about that on the way to record this episode today. that we had a Prius,
You did.
and you thought that was the craziest thing to have a Prius.
Well, you
Prius.
thought you were the typical millennial that thought everyone needed to drive a Prius.
Yeah.
I mean, weren't you?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so you were trying to convince me to drive a Prius. I didn't understand that this was 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago. I didn't understand the concept of hybrid.
Of saving the environment. You didn't understand that concept?
Are you trying to say my words for me? I thought these things would only go 100 miles on a charge or less than that probably, and then you'd have to stop somewhere and charge it up. I didn't realize it was a hybrid.
Yeah.
Didn't know what a hybrid was.
And then what car do you drive today, Tim?
I drive a Tesla fully electric car.
Look how far you have come.
You were trying to get there, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. That was awesome. All right. Well, because we talked about communication today, we want to introduce you to 3 of our LeadingSmart partners that make all of this possible, from the podcast to our gatherings to our monthly cohorts. And we have 3 of them that serve churches through communication in some way. So the first is an organization called Reach the Lost. They are phenomenal with church searches, not pastoral searches like for people, but showing up online. So marketing and SEO. Ryan, who is their founder and CEO, did a really great exercise at an event that Tim and I were at our executive pastor gathering that we were at, where he had every church pull up their church. Well, actually Google them first, put your church in on Google and then on Google Maps as well. And he threw out 3 to 4 things. Even my home church is the one I used. And I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
How far down it is in the search.
Well, yeah. And ours doesn't even say church in it, you know?
Yeah.
And so anyway, if you are really wanting to do they'll do a free analysis for you. They're awesome. ReachTheLost.com. Ryan and his team have helped a lot of churches.
They'll help, when people type in, First Church of Birmingham, whatever your church name is, they'll help that get higher. But also if people just say I'm lonely, I need resources. How do you get the church to show up high? Or I'm thinking about taking my life, or my marriage is falling apart. How do you get the church to show up high as a resource for those? So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. The second partner that helps churches through communication is Intulse. And so Intulse, they do several different things, but their primary way that they serve the church is through phone systems. And if before you're like me and you're like, what? That sounds boring.
That's so
actually super cool.
Yeah.
So especially in really innovative ways, like making sure that we're, from a compliance and safety perspective, that people can use their own phone, but the messaging is being, for church usage, is being funneled through safe and compliant, means of communication. They also make sure that your messaging and phone systems connect with your CHRM. I always have to think
CHMS.
CHMS. Oh my gosh. See, I knew I would do that. So that,
church management system.
Yeah. You're texting a new member. It's all going to be stored right there in your church management system. They can also help with, outsourced IT services as well, but that's Intulse with an I, Intulse.
That's right.
We're really grateful for Christian and the team at Intulse. And that leads me to our third one that helps with the communication, which is Touchpoint. And so they have a church management system, making sure that you're not just storing your congregants' data or information, which there are so many churches that don't even do that. So start there. Know who's actually a part of your community. And then how can you further engage with them? Make sure that we're engaging with them to help them take their next step in discipleship, whether it's a small group or attending an event or giving. And Touchpoint is an all-in-one system. There's a lot out there. And what I love about Touchpoint is they're the first to say that. They're like, hey, there's a lot of options out there. We would just love to see if we're the right one for you. So
yeah.
Again, thanks to Reach the Lost, Intulse, and Touchpoint for being our LeadingSmart partners and serving churches in the way that you do. If you have a need in any of those 3 areas, make sure you do that. Well, Tim, thanks for walking us through what it looks like to effectively communicate the transition and succession process. Next up, we're going to be talking about, in episode 8, the transition team, who's on it and why it matters. So stay tuned for that.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to today's episode. I wanted to invite you to download our Pastoral Succession ebook at LeadingSmart.com. We do a deep dive of all of the things that we've been talking about this season. And so you can download it for free at LeadingSmart.com and walk through it by yourself or your team or your board. So go to LeadingSmart.com to download the Pastoral Succession ebook today.